I never expected that the woman my husband was cheating with would be my dad's caregiver. My 60-year-old dad is planning to marry Diana, the caregiver who looks after him, and he's proudly showing off that Diana is already pregnant. I thought it was just a typical story of a young maid stringing along a wealthy old man, but when the paternity test results came out, my husband was the first to panic. On a busy Monday morning, I was holding a meeting with the staff. My dad called, his voice full of excitement. "Cynthia, remember to come home for dinner after work. Dad has some good news to share." Then, pretending to be mysterious, he added, "Make sure to bring Kevin too. You all better be mentally prepared, haha." I couldn't help but shake my head with a smile. Just turned 60 and already acting like a big kid, still so lively even after breaking a leg. I took out my phone and sent a message to my husband Kevin, telling him to come to my dad's house for dinner after work. They say a son-in-law is like half a son, but Kevin is worth a whole one. Kevin and I got married 3 years ago, and after the wedding, we moved out of my family home. But the marital home was prepared by my dad, just across the street from my parents' place. I'm not really fond of always crashing meals at my parents' house, but Kevin enjoys it thoroughly. He's diligent and sweet-talking, and he manages to cheer my dad up like no one else. When I was 18, my mom passed away from illness, leaving my dad alone. A year ago, the caregiver who had been looking after him went home to see her grandchild, and since then, we haven't found anyone suitable. Half a year ago, my dad carelessly fell down the stairs and fractured his tibia. After being discharged from the hospital, he still hadn't fully recovered, so Kevin specially hired a female caregiver to look after him at home. When we got home, the meal was already prepared. It was clear that my dad was in a good mood today. He had deliberately changed into new clothes, a maroon high-neck t-shirt paired with a black jacket, and his hair was combed meticulously. I smiled broadly and asked him, "Handsome, any good news?" My dad winked deliberately at Kevin and me, his eyes full of pride. "Guess what?" Kevin asked, "Did the company give out mid-year bonuses? Or is our house going to be demolished again?" My dad and I both burst out laughing. This guy is always thinking about the good stuff. My dad cleared his throat and said solemnly, "I'm going to marry Diana." "Marry who?" I was momentarily confused. Who is Diana? It was only after Kevin reminded me that I realized Diana was the caregiver who had been looking after Dad. I didn't know what to say at first. I wanted to object firmly, but when I saw the eager look in my dad's eyes, I just couldn't bring myself to speak. "Dad, this isn't a small matter. You should think it over again." He chuckled, "No need to think twice, Diana's pregnant. My 60-year-old dad, having a second spring, is going to have a second child." I sat there dumbfounded, opening my mouth to say something but not knowing what to say. Looking at his joyful expression, I even found it a little endearing. With a loud slap, Kevin banged the table and stood up in protest. "Dad, you're 60 this year. What are you stirring up? Isn't this just asking to be taken advantage of?" I really didn't expect Kevin to react so strongly. He had never once talked back to my dad. Now, his nostrils flared and his eyes blazed with anger. I was so scared that I quickly grabbed his hand and made him sit down. My dad had long lost his smile, his face ashen, waving his hand at the two of us. "You two can leave. This is my own business, you don't need to interfere." The meal ended on a sour note. I was quite surprised by my dad's remarriage, but Kevin's extreme reaction surprised me even more. He's always been mild-mannered and the best at flattering his father-in-law. What's gotten into him this time? On the way back, I couldn't help but scold Kevin, "Why are you so worked up? You look so anxious, someone who didn't know might think I was stolen from you." He explained, "I'm anxious because of you. If your dad has a second child, your inheritance will have to be split in two." I snorted with laughter. Hasn't my dad already given us enough? The house, the company, aren't they all from him? Hearing me say that, he got a bit flustered. "So you don't care anymore?" "I never said I don't care. If that Diana is genuinely taking care of my dad, wouldn't that put our minds at ease? I don't see anything wrong with that. She's only 35, and your dad is 60. What sincerity could she possibly have? Who knows where she got pregnant, and now she's coming to your dad to take over. Kevin's words grew harsher, and I impatiently cut him off. You know my dad's temper, he's always firm and decisive. I advise you not to meddle. He sneered but said no more. I knew he probably didn't take a word I said to heart. After a few quiet days, my dad called me back in, fuming. As soon as I walked in, he launched into a tirade. Kevin really doesn't see himself as an outsider. He actually came over here to lecture me on how to live. Wasn't that you teaching him? I defended. How is that possible? He just can't accept it right now. My father-in-law getting remarried, what can't he accept? She said, tossing her phone to me. Look at all the messages he's been sending me every day. Good grief. Kevin has sent my dad 16 cases of nannies scamming rich old men into marriage over the past few days. I have no idea where he found them. Not only did he send messages, he even came to our house, swearing that my dad remarrying would hurt the bond between us father and daughter, and that the child Diana is carrying isn't my dad's at all. My dad sat down beside me, sighed, and softly asked, Cynthia, I just want to know, what are you thinking? I looked at this little old man in front of me, overwhelmed with mixed emotions. My mom has been gone for over 10 years. He took care of me while running his business, never once neglecting me. Back then, when I said I liked Kevin but his family was too poor, my dad said, it's okay, he may be poor but our family has money. Buying houses and cars was no problem, he even set up a small company for me. Now, seeing him happy and joyful again, I couldn't bear to pour cold water on it. Dad, as long as Diana truly wants to be with you, I have no objections. My dad had arranged a gathering, planning to formally introduce Diana to us. It was the first time I took a serious look at this caregiver who was only 4 years older than me. She had deliberately put on light makeup, with delicate eyebrows and slender eyes, and a figure full of twists and turns. No wonder she managed to capture my dad's heart. Cynthia, from now on just call me Diana, don't call me auntie or anything like that. Not only was she good-looking, but she also knew how to read the room and speak appropriately. I smiled and gave my dad a slight nod, meaning, she's quite good. My dad smiled but said nothing. Kevin was sulking silently, but when he heard us talking about children, he suddenly blew his top. Dad, you've been sharp all your life, don't let someone else raise your kids. Saying that, he shot a fierce glare at Diana. I gave him a look, signaling him to shut up. Kevin ignored it, gritting his teeth as he said to Diana, you can fool others, but not me. Don't forget who introduced you. What kind of person am I, then? Why don't you tell me what kind of person I am? Diana was clearly no pushover, her eyes challenging Kevin. You're more than 20 years younger than him. What could you possibly want from him? Diana started to sob. I just like mature men. I was the one who pursued Samuel. Does being older mean you can't have love? Honestly, she was overacting a bit here. Kevin kept losing it. Then do you dare to take a paternity test? Fine, I'll do it. Tomorrow. They went back and forth like this, sounding nothing like it was their first fight. There are still risks involved in doing a paternity test during pregnancy. I wanted to say something to persuade them, but when I saw my dad with a dark face, head down and silent, I didn't dare to utter a word. A couple of days later, Diana sent the test report to my phone. The child was indeed my dad's. I breathed a sigh of relief. After getting the test results, I calmly sat down to talk with Kevin. I think I understood what he was worried about. First of all, Diana is so young, even if my dad passes away, she can raise the child on her own and will never be a burden to us. As for the inheritance, what my dad has given is already enough for our future life. If he has other plans for himself, I will support that too. Kevin listened to my point of view, wearing a look of disdain. You say it so easily. You'll see when the time comes. I sighed deeply as I watched his back. Kevin, your attitude is really hard to swallow. I thought once the test results came out, Kevin, as the instigator, would be embarrassed. But to my surprise, not only was he not embarrassed, he became even more anxious. He somehow found a lawyer and brought him to my dad's office to give him a lesson on protecting his assets. Then he coaxed my dad into signing a prenuptial agreement and even persuaded him to make a will, leaving all the inheritance to me and Kevin. This whole maneuver made my dad so furious that his blood pressure skyrocketed, and he ended up in the hospital. Because Diana was pregnant, she didn't come to accompany him. When I arrived, my dad was lying on the bed, staring blankly. After a long while, he slowly said, "This time, I've come to understand and even sympathize with Kevin's odd behavior. He's convinced that all my assets will eventually be his. Now that Diana has appeared, he feels threatened." After he spoke, he looked at me. I lowered my head in shame and murmured, "Yeah, I know. Go back and try to reason with him. A little kindness can be repaid with ingratitude, one must learn to be content." As I walked out of the hospital building, I spotted two familiar figures from afar, Kevin and Diana. I quietly slipped to the side to wait for them to pass, then watched with my own eyes as they went up to the third-floor maternity clinic together. These two put on a show of being sworn enemies, yet they come to the hospital together. What kind of act is this? Kevin lay on the bed, scrolling through his phone out of sheer boredom. I pretended to be casual as I probed him. "Honey, where did you go this afternoon? Why didn't you visit Dad at the hospital?" Without hesitation, he replied, "There was an emergency at work, I couldn't leave. I'll go tomorrow." If I hadn't caught him, I might have actually believed that. I pressed on, "By the way, isn't that Diana the hometown girl you brought in? Why do you suddenly dislike her so much now?" I caught a flicker of caution in his eyes, but he quickly masked it. "I'm just worried Dad might get taken advantage of. After this, I'm done dealing with it. It's making me look bad no matter what I do." I urged him to take a shower, then grabbed his phone and effortlessly unlocked it. Opening WeChat, his friends list was filled only with colleagues and relatives, all with clean, tidy profile pictures. I searched one by one using "love you" and "good night" as keywords, and all the conversations that popped up were messages he sent to me. But I didn't feel happy at all, it was just too clean. The less trace there was, the more I had a bad feeling. When Diana came to work as a caregiver, she once gave me a copy of her ID card, which I sent to a friend to help investigate. 3 days later, I got the results, and at that moment, I felt like a joke. Before Diana came to my house as a caregiver, she had never worked as one. She was employed at a wellness spa. This didn't surprise me, as my dad had often praised her massage skills as professional level. The more explosive news was that Diana was my husband Kevin's ex-girlfriend. The ladies at the spa immediately recognized them from the photo. It is said that a year ago, Diana quit her job to focus entirely on being Kevin's mistress. To be honest, when I heard this, I wasn't so much heartbroken as utterly disgusted. Kevin has spent these past few years going to great lengths to pretend to be a good husband and a good son. It's really impressive, in a twisted way. As I was figuring out how to break this to my dad, Diana showed up at my door. She came begging me to help her. I arranged to meet her at a cafe with surveillance cameras. Diana was pregnant, and if anything went wrong, I wanted to have clear evidence. After a few days apart, Diana's belly seemed much bigger, but she looked even thinner. Her face was pale, her lips cracked and white. Gone was the sparkle and confidence she had the last time we met. She grabbed my hand firmly. "Cynthia, you have to help me, help my child." I patted her hand and handed her a cup of hot water. "Don't worry, take your time and tell me." She held the cup of hot water tightly with both hands, whispering silently, "I'm sorry to you." Her voice was barely audible. I stirred the coffee in front of me and smiled gently. "Why do you say that?" I'm Kevin's girlfriend. No, I'm actually his mistress." I showed no sign of surprise, nodding for her to continue. She sighed heavily, furrowing her brows, and began to speak hesitantly. Diana and Kevin were more than just first loves. After Kevin got into university, Diana came to this city to work and earn his tuition fees. Kevin promised her they would marry after she graduated, but unexpectedly, Kevin turned around and got together with me. After we got married, she cut off contact with Kevin, until a year ago when they met again at the club and rekindled their relationship. Half a year ago, my dad broke his leg and needed a caregiver. Kevin saw it as a good opportunity and introduced Diana. One reason was to keep an eye on my dad's movements at all times, and the other was that under the cover of darkness, it was easier for them to meet secretly. I couldn't help but gasp, my stomach churning. The husband I had lived with for 3 years was actually this kind of person. So? Why are you coming to me now? Your dad has been so good to me. Even though he's much older than me, I really want to be with him and live a good life. But. She wiped away her tears and continued, Kevin forced me to have an abortion. He said no matter what, I couldn't keep the baby. He even took me to the hospital for the pre-abortion checkup. If I refused, he threatened to tell Samuel everything that had happened before. Diana cried bitterly, silent but with tears streaming down relentlessly. I understood now. Kevin married me with the firm intention of ending my family line. Now that my father is remarrying and planning a second child, of course he can't sit still. I stared into Diana's eyes and asked solemnly, Diana, being with my father and having his child, are you really sure you won't regret it? Diana met my gaze and answered firmly, Samuel can give me a stable and privileged life, and I'm willing to take care of him. I don't regret it. I patted her shoulder. Then you focus on taking care of the baby. Leave everything else to me. Since Kevin threatened Diana that he would tell my dad, I had to make the first move and lay my cards on the table. Dad, I need to tell you something. Be prepared and don't get upset. My dad said, what a coincidence, I have something to tell you too. You need to be ready. I let him speak first. He pulled out a stack of photos from the drawer. They were pictures of Kevin and Diana together, some taken at the hospital, others in a corner of the neighborhood. Turns out my dad had someone tailing them. Seeing my calm reaction, my dad looked a bit surprised. So, you already knew? I gave a helpless smile. That's exactly why I came to see you. Then I laid out everything, how Diana came to me for help. My dad was silent for a few minutes after hearing it, then quietly said, Diana is a woman with a hard life too. As expected of my dad, he sensed something was off when Kevin repeatedly interfered with the wedding plans, so he had someone keep an eye on him for a few days. My dad said that as long as Diana sincerely wanted to live with him, he wouldn't dig up the past. But for someone like Kevin, ungrateful, greedy, and heartless, it wouldn't be so simple. I placed the divorce agreement in front of him, but Kevin still pretended to be innocent. Honey, don't be like this. However, after seeing the secretly taken photos, he immediately caved and went silent, then revealed a different side of himself. Divorce, huh? Fine. The house and company will be split 50-50, cashed out to me. Without $5 million, I won't sign. I stared at the man before me in shock. How could I have been so blind back then? Kevin, are you crazy? The house was fully paid for by my dad, the company was started with my dad's seed money, the clients are through my dad's connections. It has nothing to do with you. I know, but if you don't give me money, I won't sign no matter what. I can afford to wait. At that moment, I laughed out loud, angrily laughing. If you're heartless, don't blame me for being ruthless. A week later, I handed Kevin a thick stack of documents, evidence freshly gathered from finance and auditing. Kevin, didn't you say we'd split the assets evenly? We've been married 3 years, let's settle the accounts first. How much company procurement money have you embezzled? How many kickbacks have you taken? How much have you secretly transferred out? The audit has everything crystal clear. The further Kevin flipped through, the uglier his face grew. Finally, he slammed his fist on the table in anger. "Cynthia, you're investigating me." The documents detailed every private financial transaction with suppliers over the years, kickback records, and transfer logs to Diana, each entry laid out clearly. The lawyer said that this counts as embezzlement of company property through abuse of position, plus accepting bribes privately. If the amount is huge, he could be sentenced to around 6 years. Kevin saw I was serious and immediately broke down. "I didn't do it, it wasn't me, I was just doing my job normally." Looking at his pathetic state, I sneered, "The company has already reported this to the police." Save those words for the judge. "Cynthia, I love you, please give me another chance." Even at this moment, his acting was still so convincing. "If you want to wipe us out, you need the basic skills to do it right. Trying to clean us out while treating my father and me like fools? No way." Before my dad and Diana got their marriage certificate, he divided the assets, transferring my mom's share of the current assets into my name. I grinned cheekily at my dad. "You better live a long life, because I'm not going to support your son." He took Diana's hand and said, "With Diana taking care of me, you can rest assured." Watching my father's wrinkles smooth out, his health improve, and his happiness grow, how could I have any worries? Kevin finally signed the divorce papers. Now he's trying to gather money to return the stolen funds, because if he can get my letter of forgiveness before the verdict, the judge might consider a lighter sentence. My dad asked if I would forgive him. I smiled and shook my head. He could deceive my feelings, but not my money. Still, I'm grateful he taught me a valuable lesson about the treachery of human nature. You can know a person's face but not their heart. Facing the future, I am filled with courage once again.